So in the next hour, we're going to try and address some key questions about how the overall impact of Horizon can be assessed, both in Europe and internationally. What will define success in 2030? How will progress be measured? What are the potential barriers that may limit its impact? And to what degree can Horizon provide a framework and a connecting point for a new age of global R&D cooperation between Europe and like-minded partners? So, to help me explore these questions, and hopefully yours, I'm delighted to welcome four eminent panelists. Mona Nima, Chief Science Advisor to the Government of Canada, Patrick Child, Deputy Director General at DG Research and Innovation at the European Commission, Jean Sombaz, President of Sorbonne University, and Kimmo Koski, the Chief Executive and Chair of CSC IT Centre for Science. So thank you all very much for joining us. Now, we're going to start with an outside-in view from Ottawa on the fast-evolving dynamics of international R&I and how Horizon fits into the bigger picture. So, Mona, we're going to begin with a few minutes of discussion with you, if we may. And welcome very much. Thank you for joining us. Let's start with the first question about the scientific response to the pandemic. And you have a unique role as a Chief Science Advisor to a major R&D-oriented government. So I guess the first question is, how has the international research response or scientific response to the pandemic been influencing the way Canada is thinking about its strategy and also its strategic research and innovation partnerships as you look to the future?
Well, thank you very much for having me with you. I'm delighted to be here and speaking to you from cold and but sunny Ottawa in Canada. So the pandemic has been such an incredible exercise, I guess, for governments, for scientists, and for the international community in general. And, you know, it's, I think, taught us so many lessons so far. One of them is, of course, the importance of science, of research and development. The second is the importance of the international community, of international connectivity. Yeah, as I was providing advice to our government, I was definitely relying on credible data that's coming out of everywhere in the world, certainly from Europe, from other similarly minded countries, as you mentioned. I think that developments of therapeutics, of vaccines, what we saw in terms of efficacy of clinical trials, all these were incredibly important international endeavors and facts. And when one government, you know, used them in different ways than another government, they certainly had to do some explaining to the population. And of course, consistency was important if we wanted to maintain public trust. If one country was using masks, the other not using masks, there were questions being asked, there were questions being raised about the relevance of the data. So I think what this pandemic has taught us is the critical importance of maintaining connectivity in terms of both science, research, development, but also science advice.
So in parallel, Mona, does that mean that you're rethinking the way that you define and the kind of objectives that you set for future international partnerships? I mean, obviously it's been quite an interesting period south of the border in the last 4 years. The new administration has a renewed focus on science for society. But does this change your thinking about where Canada positions itself in terms of international cooperation?
Well, you know, scientific cooperation have been extremely important for Canada. Science and research are part of our free trade agreement, particularly with the European Union. So this is a very early recognition of this importance. We believe both in science diplomacy and also in joint international efforts that have to really go on irrespective of politics and of administrations. Of course, it's always easier when we have governments that are inclined to international cooperation and to listening to research. But for Canada, we have long-standing relationships with Europe, with our, of course, largest the largest country with whom we share a border, the United States of America, and as well as other countries. Built on very deep relationships, people training in each other's countries, people working together. So I think what the pandemic has really shined a light on the importance maybe of finding mechanisms that will be both effective and agile for collaboration on an ongoing basis. And also, today it's a health pandemic. Tomorrow, it's perhaps an environmental crisis. Plus, we don't need to wait for crisis to be working together.
Absolutely. And we'll come in just a moment to the role or potential role of Horizon Europe in this. But, again, chief science advisors have perhaps been in a global spotlight unlike ever before. And so in that sense, I think before we get to the potential links with Horizon Europe, a question about the critical importance of this relationship between politics, policy and science, which I guess you've been experiencing in an unprecedented way in the past 12 months. So I'm just wondering, from that experience, how do you think this interface, this relationship can be strengthened as we go forward into what we hope is the post-COVID age, so that we have stronger, more effective policy making, we have more political recognition of the value of science, and that science itself has a more vocal presence in public debate?
Yes, I think, this is an incredibly important time for science to be impacting, to be, influencing our policies and our future. And I certainly hope that the urgent need for science to inform policies over the past year in an incredibly real-time manner, I hope that we can build on this to maintain the relationship, certainly in Canada, that we have developed between scientists and policymakers. I think it's really important from the get-go to recognize the difference between science advice, policy options, and decision making as well. To recognize, each one's role and responsibility, but also limitations, and respect them in all this. I think all this can be, of course, was put in the public eye like never before, and the public is better informed, and the public is demanding to have more information. I don't think that the idea of patronizing the public, of telling them just do this and we know why, works any longer anywhere. Public's demanding to understand the basis, the data, the evidence, the science behind decisions. So I think that we need to increase science literacy to satisfy this very important development, I think, in the public, which will influence how politicians also react to science. And I think it's really important for politicians to recognize the limitation as well, perhaps, of science evidence in their decision makings, because they're all the time doing sort of risk mitigation, weighing priorities, putting more weights on one thing versus the other. And that's normal. We elect them to do this. But I think that the public wants to understand the basis for the decisions and wants also to understand what was prioritized. So understanding this developing dynamic, I think we can actually do a lot to move this forward in a very sustainable manner, and developing this trustworthy relationship between science and politicians, but also with the public, so that when we're in a crisis situation and we need to be making decisions quickly, that we need to weigh uncertainty and we need public, maintaining public trust, that we have it. We don't have to be developing those relationships under such pressure.
Very good. So let's shift to Horizon Europe itself. And First of all, I mean, you have an independent position as a Chief Science Advisor, but is there any latest perspective or position at Canadian government level on potential association? Or is this a case of wait and see for the time being?
Well, you know, before the pandemic, Canada expressed interest in joining Horizon Europe. We did contribute to the last round of Horizon 2020, and we were awaiting actually the Commission's guidance in terms of what association can look like and involve. So I can certainly say that, to my knowledge, the importance for Canada of working with the European Union in the context of Horizon Europe has not diminished. On the contrary, I think that we've seen the importance of working together to speed the finding solutions to complex problems. I think that we have similar priorities in many countries in terms of clean technology, climate change, net zero for 2050. So certainly on this side of the Atlantic, we are very much looking forward to furthering the discussions and seeing how we can be active participants in this, you know, incredible international effort.
Fantastic. Well, we certainly hope that Canada comes on board in the not too distant future. Now, one final question before we move the conversation on to Mr. Child. Based on what you just said, does Canada, as part of its sort of science, tech and innovation strategy, see the greatest value around particular or specific domains, such as renewable energies or hydrogen and AI? Or is it on an equal footing with infrastructure, with data, pandemic preparedness, and other more transversal aspects of the framework program?
You know, it's not one versus the other, because as you rightly point out, there are transversal issues, and by tackling climate change, we will need to be looking at other more vertical areas like infrastructure, like transport, but also like health. I think environmental changes have an incredible contribution to population and public health, and it needs to be recognized. So sometimes, and it's going to depend on the programs and the endeavors, some horizontal areas might feed onto different thematic priorities, if you want. And in other areas, we might find it, depending on the developmental stage of the knowledge and the applications, we might find it perhaps more effective to be working, for example, like in the case of clean energy, or the case of developing more broad-acting antiviral, medical countermeasures for emerging viruses. So I wouldn't say it's one or the other, and it may change depending on the time, the program, and how science also is evolving.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for those insights, Mona. And I'd like now to move to Patrick Child from the European Commission. And if we can, Patrick, let's stick with green for the time being, because the Green Deal is obviously a huge part of the framework around research and innovation for the next decade. So I'm wondering, from your perspective, what do you think it actually means for international cooperation, and challenges, opportunities for associated countries? And what are some of the external components of the Green Deal that we should be taking into consideration?
Thanks very much, Simon. Very good to be here. And I'd like just first to agree with Mona that international collaboration on science and research, is well established and a very central dimension of the European research programs over many years. And we're very much looking forward to extending the scope for our engagement with partners all over the world with the new program Horizon Europe. And you're right to highlight the European Green Deal. I mean, this is a headline priority for the European Commission, for the European Union, as we seek to be the first sort of net zero, climate neutral, carbon neutral, continent by 2050. With a very clear recognition that if the world is going to meet the objectives of the Paris Agreement and the really demanding transformations that we have set for ourselves collectively, it's going to require a major global mobilization in order to achieve that, in particular on research and innovation, where many of the technologies to help us bring our energy system to full carbon neutrality are hard to abate industries like cement, aluminium, steel production, or the way we live in cities, or the way we transport ourselves around the world. I mean, all these things need really fundamental transformations, and it is only through research and innovation that we're going to achieve that. But you asked me for some examples. I mean, I'm personally very, very much involved in a global initiative called Mission Innovation, which was launched at the time of the Paris COP meeting 5 years ago. I'm very happy that Canada is also an extremely active participant in Mission Innovation alongside another 20 or so countries around the world, all committed to working on research and innovation on clean energy and finding affordable solutions for clean energy for everyone in the world. And we've got some really exciting proposals now, and we're working very actively with the new administration under President Biden also to prepare for a new wave of mission innovation, where we hope that we'll be able to raise further our level of ambition, working together on issues like clean hydrogen, on how the power system works with renewables, or big challenges like long distance shipping and the sort of very difficult fuel challenges of zero emissions and travel. So, I mean, some really exciting things that we in Europe are very, very committed to, where in Europe we often have a strong scientific and technological lead, but where we need to work with international partners more and more actively in order to achieve the global ambitions that we have set ourselves.
And Patrick, just building on this, to what degree do these kinds of initiatives actually address the questions of governance and ownership of the new technologies being developed, not just in Europe, but elsewhere in the world? How can Horizon and some of these related initiatives ensure that there is equitable, universal access to these new technologies and not just limited to the developers?
Well, you're right that, I mean, we're facing a global challenge, and therefore we need to make sure that as we develop and deploy new technologies, that they are available not just to the rich and developed countries, but globally. And so we do work with global networks, and Mission Innovation that I mentioned has close links also with the World Bank, and we're working through the sort of global community in the COP and the sort of general challenges of the relationship between the North and South, in order to ensure that as clean energy solutions emerge, that they are widely available and affordable for communities around the world. You're right also that there is a big commercial dimension to all of this, and that there is as you get closer and closer to markets and closer to commercial exploitation of new technologies, we leave the realm of scientific collaboration and international sort of working together into a slightly more competitive dynamic, where of course the industry is working in the European Union, where, as I say, we have a strong lead in areas like wind technology, are keen to see the benefits of that also flowing back to jobs and competitiveness in the European economy. And that, of course, has also a dimension in our trading relations around the world. But I think that the scale of the challenges that we're facing and the scale of the opportunities for a real clean industrial revolution across the whole of the world mean that there are plenty of opportunities for everyone, and that with programs like Horizon Europe, where we're looking at the research and innovation opportunities, we can make a really powerful European contribution.
Now, if we can stick with the money for a minute, obviously not just the green but the digital transitions foreseen by the Commission all require and anticipate very optimistically a huge amount of private sector and also national financing. So, I mean, just taking, I think, the new renewable energy strategy that was launched in November, I think 800 billion is indicated as the figure required to achieve the renewable energy goals. So within Horizon, are there concrete steps or plans being built into the programme to strengthen the value proposition for the private sector and for other investors to crowd in behind the public lead? What can we expect in the years to come that will make a compelling case for this investment to flow?
No, well, you're absolutely right. I mean, the scale of the investments that are require massive mobilization of the private sector, massive support from national resources, as well as, what we can do at European level. I just mentioned 3 examples of some of the new things we're trying to do in Horizon Europe. Firstly, we've created a specific new body, the European Innovation Council, and I don't know whether you've heard about that already in some of the discussions earlier in this conference, but the European Innovation Council is intended to achieve the same sort of standards of world-beating excellence that we see from the European Research Council in the area of fundamental research when it comes to supporting innovation and the translation of successful innovation into commercial opportunities and success. And so we've already had, under the final few years of Horizon 2020, some really successful pilot actions of this new sort of this new approach to supporting innovation in Europe using our research and innovation funding. And we're going to build on that massively with this new organization under Horizon Europe. The second thing that I'd mention is that we are working on a whole generation of new private public partnerships in key industrial sectors. So in things like aviation, clean hydrogen, innovative medicines, the bio-based industries, and a number of other sectors where we believe that by providing a sort of a policy lead, a sort of source of inspiration, if you like, to the private sector, and to engage them in a sort of forward-looking research and innovation strategy, we can have a very, very strong multiplier effect on the resources that we're able to provide from EU funds. And the third area, and this comes back to what we were discussing a moment ago with Mona about the importance of science and research capturing also the public imagination and inspiring confidence of the public and politicians who serve them, in order to provide a lead in public policy. And there we've got these new headline missions under Horizon Europe. So missions on things like having carbon neutral cities by 2030, or beating cancer, or having an action support for our broader action plan on cancer through research and innovation, or clean oceans, or a healthy soil system, or climate adaptation, things that really resonate with citizens, with the public, which therefore can not only be a good focus for the way that we spend European research and innovation funds, national research and innovation funds, we hope and we believe also mobilize and inspire much larger investments through other EU funding streams, through the national financial instruments, through the European Investment Bank and its work, and also through the private sector.
Patrick, thank you very much. Now I'm going to have one final question for you, then bring in Kimmo and Jean, who've been waiting very patiently to join the discussion. And it's on impact. So this is the transition to the key theme in the session. Since Horizon's early days, DG Research in particular has been committed to assessing and reporting on progress through to some long-term destinations or intended outcomes of Horizon by 2030. So as the launch of the programme arrives, how are these going to be measured? And what impact is that going to have on people who are applying for future projects and grants?
I think the starting point is that we've been discussing with our member states and with the research and innovation communities that we're working with, a new strategic plan for Horizon Europe. This is the first time that we've set out in such a clear way a forward-looking strategic plan for the first few years of the programme, which we've developed in a really sort of innovative co-creation spirit with all of our stakeholders and with the member states, with our supporters in the European Parliament. And a big focus of that was the major Research and Innovation Days conference that we organized here in Brussels virtually, of course, last September. And we intend with the strategic plan to set out more clearly, perhaps than before, a number of sort of specific milestones, if you like, sort of success pathways for the research objectives that we want to achieve. Because I think we're more and more conscious that in the ever more challenging budgetary environment, in the sort of post-COVID recovery period, it's I think going to be even more challenging. We're in competition with other EU financial programs, and of course, the EU budget has to demonstrate its value added, and therefore, we really need to find new ways of setting benchmarks and then calibrating and measuring our success against those benchmarks. I mean, the missions I mentioned earlier, I think is a particularly good example. So if, for example, on the cities mission, we set ourselves an objective of working together to have, say, 100 carbon neutral cities by 2030. By 2030, we will be able to discover whether or not we have achieved that objective. And I think that's the sort of spirit that we need to bring to the work that we're doing under Horizon Europe.
Very good.
And then at a more micro level, your question about, well, what does this mean for individual consortia, individual project proposals? We will continue to be increasingly attentive to the results that we want the research to achieve, recognizing that a good result can either be positive or negative in some senses, but the results that we want to achieve, rather than just the inputs in terms of how much money we spend or how much time we expect researchers to be working on a particular project. And that means we have to become...
I'll pause here if I can, Patrick, because I'd very much like to bring to Jean and Kimo in, because and again, thank you very much for your patience. So, I mean, Kimo, Jean, you both lead frontier research organizations, CSC, IT Centre for Science, at the forefront of digital, supercomputing and skills development. Jean, as one of Europe's oldest and leading research universities, from fundamental through to applied science. My question to you is around these aspirations and the expectations for Horizon, and what you see as the potential barriers to Horizon achieving what Europe expects. So let me give the floor first to Jean Chambaz from the Sorbonne. Jean, let's know what you see as the potential obstacles we're going to have to overcome, or things that might get in the way of progress.
Okay, thank you. I will speak on behalf of Sorbonne University, but also of l'ERU, the League of European Research Universities that I'm chairing. I would say that the most important obstacle I see in the success of Horizon Europe is exactly the result-driven objectives of the program. Of course, we are involved and we are engaged for an impact in the development, social, economical, and cultural development of Europe, on the recovery of an innovative European industry. But we know that the results and the disruptive innovation doesn't come by asking for them, but from free research. And so we are really concerned, of course, of the too low budget of Horizon Europe. And when it was said that we need a mobilization of national budgets in line with the European budget, we have to consider that the Council of the States decided to reduce strongly the Horizon Europe budget as compared to the propositions of the Commission of the Parliament. So we could be a little bit skeptical. So what is important, even in the balance in Horizon Europe between Pillar 1, which is pushing top-notch free research, and we could consider from Horizon 2020 that the most important disruptive innovation funded by European budget came from ERC more than from the result-driven research. And even in the mission pillar of Horizon Europe, still let the consortia develop free research, fundamental research. Actually, I'm quite fascinated by the vaccine, the COVID vaccine history. If we went so fast in developing new vaccines, if you consider the previous pandemics, it makes much more time than for the COVID. Why did the community succeeded so fast? It's because some of the teams were working on the coronaviruses for 20 years. Some others were developing research, fundamental research on RNA vaccines, and they were ready to act. They were ready to be mobilized. So the question is really important to have a strong support on fundamental research, letting the scientists in capacity to do so, to mobilize themselves to find the good solutions.
Thank you very much, Jean. Now, Kimmo, the same question to you. It appears you just frozen. Yeah, go ahead, Kimmo.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can now. Thank you.
Okay. So I would like to highlight a couple of points about this. Now, first of all, of course, the goals and targets of Horizon is very well, where they are worth targeting, very good goals, and I think also realistic in many ways. But in order to be able to achieve such a development, I think if you talk about these barriers, one of the things coming very often towards us is this fragmentation. So, I mean, if we want to achieve something new, something higher, I mean, now, for example, in one part of the Horizon, you are driving European Open Science Cloud and some data-related science, for example. Then we have a high-performance computing, Euro HPC-related things, AI somewhere, etc. So I think there is a danger that if all these activities, which are actually part of the same ecosystem, if they get too fragmented inside the Commission or inside the countries and member states, I mean that will not be optimal. So I think we should bring them together, find the ways how we can, how we can make this horizontal layer in this Commission work together with member states and together with Commission. So there is a big opportunity on that. So paying some focus or attention to this possible fragmentation. Other point I would like to make is that if we really want to be successful, we need to increase trust between those of us who are providing infrastructure services like this high-performance computing or whatever, data-related science, and also with the researchers, so that the different domains of research, they would be able to use the same resources together in different centers, for example. So the trust between the infrastructure providers and researchers, that's another area. So these kind of activities or these kind of topics might really bring this even further ahead.
Thank you, Kimmo. Well, let's stay with this point a little bit and then broaden it out. And I'll ask Mona to reflect on this first. I mean, we've heard a lot over the past 2 days about the importance of digital ecosystems and infrastructure to support the next decade of R&I, and in particular, the question of how do we ensure that the best scientists can access the best services and infrastructure and the data they need to do their work. And do we need some new frameworks, some innovation in IP and data management to make that effective at an international level, not just within a particular region or even a particular country, vast though Canada is? So where do you see this particular agenda shaping up?
You know, I think this is a hugely important agenda actually in the management of the pandemic. We were confronted already with the issues of data, of interoperability, just basically data governance and stewardship. So I think this is something that is extremely important that we need to address collectively, because if we have inconsistent policies and approaches, I think it is going to be a major impediment, not only to working together for research and innovation, but eventually in developing common standards for new technologies and new products. So I think that one is really important. The other one on the IP, I think we need to recognize that it is something that needs to be tackled, that needs to be discussed. I think it brings together things that may look on the surface as contradictory. For example, open science, and then security, research security, trustworthiness. I think that this is where we're going to have a conversation that involves all the actors that have a role to play in this, which are the researchers themselves, the institutions, as well as government. And I think that we need to have a sort of code of conduct and acceptability of limits on open science and limits on perhaps other issues that are embraced by all these, collectively by all these actors.
And so on the back of that, and this is also a question for Jean and for Kimmo, and then I'll come back to Patrick in a minute, but how long is this realistically going to take? I mean, Jean, you talked about the importance of trust in science as well. Horizon will launch in a few weeks, or other parts of it in a few months. This sounds like an undertaking that could develop over years. And so what do you think can be done to kind of strengthen these aspects that Mona's calling for within the context of the framework program? What would effectively support you and your community of researchers in the work that you're doing, both with European partners and in the international context?
As said, Mona, it's a question of balance between sharing the data, sharing the knowledge as a public good, and sovereignty of the countries, of the development. And we see that we are facing in Europe the question of our sovereignty in digitalization. And now we are under the control of the GAFAM, and that's a problem when our sovereignty passes in private hands. So there is a limit, of course, and also, of course, in the competition, in the economic competition that Patrick mentioned before, there are limits to this cooperation, but on the scientific data, it should be as open, more than as open as possible. We have this fantastic hypocritical sentence which says as open as possible, as close as necessary. So as said, Mona, but it would be very difficult to gain confidence, but we need to have a clear code of conduct between what could be open and the most it could be, the best it is, and what should be still closed, because it's a question of sovereignty and of economical development. So we have to learn, and we have to be very active, and in the end, the Commission is quite proactive in this domain, and what is required in the application is a very good incentive for the community to go in this direction. Institutions, of course, play a very important role, and we have also to change our matrix. If we really want to develop open science, which is based on this international collaboration, and this access of knowledge for all in all the continents, we should also change our matrix of evaluation of science, and don't have our eye on the Shanghai ranking or on the numbers of papers of the impact factors in science and nature, and we would change this way to appreciate the contribution of science. So that's a global movement, and we know that in the fight against some private editors who are really predators, we need to be the whole community in America, in Europe, in Asia, and in the end, to have a chance to win this fight, but for the sake of the world and for the sake of the future. So it's not easy, but if we don't start, we never progress.
Indeed. Thank you very much for that, Jean. Kimmo, let me turn to you now, because we talked before the conference, also in the context of the LUMI supercomputer, which CSE is going to host in the very near future. And you made an interesting comment, which is that entities and infrastructures like LUMI are not necessarily about developing a supercomputing industry or sector per se. It's to provide the best possible infrastructure and access and services to global science. So before LUMI goes live and Horizon Europe goes active, do you think we need a new kind of code of conduct or standards to enable better access and a wider distribution of services to the global scientific community? What could that look like in practice?
Well, where you put the question, it might even for the Finn who don't usually speak much, it might take 2 hours to answer. But I mean, if I refer a little bit about this competition, so about the openness of science and data, I can easily refer to the previous speakers or what Sean said. I think it's pretty much the same opinion here. But now you talked about LUMI, and this is also, I mean, the question is that sometimes when does the competition end and collaboration start? So EuroHPC is one good example where we first of all we competed ruthlessly about these EuroHPC sites, and then after the decision was made, and now we are collaborating. And you talked about the access, so that means that there is in the future there will hopefully be optimal access for European researchers in 3 different EuroHPC sites, meaning also the Leonardo and Martin Rostrum from colleagues from Italy and Spain. And so that's one thing. But now I think during this EuroHPC, I hope we have learned quite a lot of things, not only how to purchase or install supercomputers, but also that what are the important points of that. So we have had a long tradition of, let's say, like top 500 lists. So I call this high performance computing ecosystem, which is not what we are looking for. So actually the target is the ecosystem. How does the different parts work together? Some part might be HPC type of things. Then you have clouds, AI related devices, quantum computing, etc. But most important thing, and I think that's also a good advice for Europe and also in this Horizon Digital Europe programs. I mean, what we want to achieve is not to run only infrastructure. That's important, of course, we need to have it. But what we want to do is to train and develop competent people. So the focus should be more in this competence and how to make things solved. Because the computers don't solve the problems. There are still people who are doing that. So I always would like to talk about in these cases about the whole ecosystem of different resources which actually are driving the competence development of the European scientists, researchers.
Thank you very much, Kimmo.
Answered the question at all, but
it did. It was a very extended answer, even by Finnish standards. So thank you for that. So I'm going to just sort of skip on to a related theme. It's actually a question from our audience, which is, it's specific to Horizon, but I think it has relevance for Canada as well, which is about the role of Horizon in supporting innovators and entrepreneurs in the long run. And beyond an EU-funded start, an initial grant, whether that's in EIC or some other kind of part of the program, is there a long-term strategy for EU funds, and also for Canadian funds, I guess, to create the frameworks necessary to tackle global challenges? So Patrick, would you like to start with this? And then Mona, if you'd like to share some thoughts afterwards.
Well, it's a very demanding question, given the scale of the challenges that we've been talking about. But I think that it is very important, and this is another thing that we are trying to develop strongly within Horizon Europe, is to ensure that there is synergies between what we try to do in the different phases of our work under Horizon Europe. And there I agree with what Jean was saying earlier, that it is also vitally important that we continue to invest heavily in fundamental research. And in fact, the European Research Council is the single sort of largest element of the overall budget, and we're very happy about that and keen to continue with that. But then those synergies also flow through to what we are doing through other EU funding programs, whether that's things like the Connecting Europe facility, the structural funds, funding through the European Investment Bank, the new InvestEU program that we have to ensure that we don't lose good ideas along the way, either because they lack funding and then fall by the wayside, or unfortunately too often that the good ideas that come out of the European research communities are picked up because they find easier funding opportunities in other parts of the world, and therefore they move their operations there. And so this idea of having a sort of a pipeline of support through different phases of EU and national funding through this greater attention on synergies is something that is extremely important. But it's, given the scale of the EU budget, it's something that also needs to mobilize other sources, as well as we were saying earlier, the private sector and national funding streams as well.
Thank you, Patrick. Now, Mona, from the Canadian perspective, is there a long-term strategy in place for supporting innovators and entrepreneurs in tackling the great global challenges of the day?
Well, I think it's, I will give the same answer. It's something actually we're in the midst of looking at and developing, particularly in the area of biomanufacturing. As you can imagine, this pandemic has really put a big spotlight on some of our weaknesses in terms of biomanufacturing and the way that the sector has developed over the past 2 decades in Canada and certainly in Europe as well. So I think it's really important that we recognize that there are different pieces to the the entire pipeline, and that we need to make sure that the different pipes fit into each other's. I think historically what we've suffered from is there have been a number of programs that were meant to encourage and support innovation. At times they were good for small companies, they weren't good enough for scaling up, but even for moving things from the lab to the proof of concept before we can even take it to a small company and so on. So I think that there is no doubt that there are a lot of investments that will be required, a lot of actors that will be required. And I think this is another reason to be collaborating among similarly minded countries, because as we collectively face fiscal challenges in our respective jurisdictions in terms of rebuilding the post-pandemic world, I think it's going to be imperative to collaborate, provide co-funding, provide different elements of the institutional support and government support through procurement, a number of these options. So we're in the midst of looking at this for biomanufacturing. We want to make sure that we don't fall into the same pitfall for clean technologies, for example, which is as well very important for Canada. And these are definitely areas where we see the potential for working collaboratively with the European Union and other allies as well.
Thank you, Mona.
And I don't forget, the quantum and computing, which are going to be critical as well.
Absolutely. Well, it's a shame we don't have the time to talk about procurement. That's something that a member of the audience wants to do. So we have time for 2 more questions. The first is from the audience, and with apologies to Patrick and Mona, it's explicitly for Jean and Kimmo. And then we'll go to the collective agreed question for the whole panel to wrap things up. And while I quickly retrieve my WhatsApp, Kimmo and Jean, the question is, do you think that Horizon should have a stronger vision of the future of research and innovation work and the infrastructure to support these new forms of work? Jean, if you'd like to go first.
Yeah, sure. I would say that it's quite a good and important instrument. What I would say on the innovation issue is that, and it's a critics we made on the EIC project from the Commission, is that the innovation is not as research based on individual persons. It's a group of persons, and even if some innovators have good ideas. And you said in the presentation that we were a frontier research institution. We are also very involved in innovation, and we built our ecosystem of innovation. And so it would be very worthy at all levels, national, European, to support the role of institutions in easing the way to innovation for our researchers, to fill the gap that was mentioned by Nora about the way to go to business and the prematuration and so on. So I get that here we have a real subject of improvement. And I would say also that I fully agree with Kimmo that even if we support the ecosystems of the different institutions, they would be very strongly connected in European networks for our own, and that we should work against the fragmentation of the research and innovation effort in Europe. And in these days, it's quite important to say that there is no room for nationalistic policy in research and innovation in Europe if we want to succeed. When we see our competitors and collaborators in the world, the States, China, even Canada, our countries are not large enough. And if we really make efficient synergies within Europe among our different countries, then Europe could play an important role in this new generation of research and innovation.
Thank you, Jean. Now, Kimmo, 1 minute if possible. I know you do an awful lot of work on skills and capacity building. So what do you think Horizon could do, or potentially the European research and education areas as they evolve, to improve this framework for the new research and innovation work environment?
Well, of course, during the pandemic, we probably learned quite a lot how to do things in a different way. What will stay and what not remains an interesting question, but I think we should already start focusing on that and trying to find the best practices on top of that. So I think the Horizon has all the possibilities, I mean, to make a difference. But I think now that because we are in a specific situation, it might be a good idea also at the same time to think about some of these horizontal topics, like for example, that how do we boost, what do we change now after the pandemic? Have we learned something that we can do things more efficiently and use the synergy between different topics? So I think that's one of the things, but remains to be seen. So I think that's maybe one I would like to add to what Jan was already saying.
Thank you very much, Kimmo. Now we're going to move to our final question, and it's a challenge for the panel to cast themselves out to 2030. You're looking back on Horizon's impact and your top 3 defining achievements in 30 seconds. What do you hope, what do you believe the program will achieve when we look back on its impact? Let's start with Mona, then to Jean, then Kimmo, and we'll wrap up with Patrick.
Well, thank you very much. This is a very, of course, challenging question, but I hope that when in 2030 that we have a new playbook to do science and innovation and to live together. I hope that through Horizon Europe, we would have created a new generation of citizens that are equally comfortable working horizontally within their countries as across the globe. And I hope that we will have made definitely progress in terms of tackling the biggest challenge of our times, which is climate change.
Fantastic. Thank you. You've set the standard. Jean, over to you.
Yeah, so I would say that, and it's also a reason to support strong institutions through Horizon Europe, is that in the same time as we perform research and innovation, we train the new leaders and actors of Europe of tomorrow. And so by focusing our research on the grand challenges, we would train them, educate them in tackling with these ideas. And the best outcome, I would say, from Horizon Europe is to have a generation of young entrepreneurs, leaders in Europe to implement new solutions to to start or contribute to solve these challenges.
Thank you, Jean. Kimmo, second from last, your 3 headlines maximum.
In 2030, Europe is one of the most competent continents globally, so I'm polite. And second point, there is a huge amount of trust between the researchers and those who provide the infrastructure services, such as the centers, and increasingly number of European collaboration is also global.
Fantastic, thank you. Patrick, the last word to you.
Okay, well, a lot's been said, but I mean, if looking back in 30 years' time, I mean, first, I think we should be learning the lessons of the pandemic, during which, as we discussed earlier, scientists have come center stage in defining how we've responded to the crisis. And if the same level of relevance and resonance of science in Europe can play into every area of policy making, I think we'll have made huge progress. Secondly, and specifically on the European Green Deal, we have precious few years ahead of us to make a decisive response to the European Green Deal, and research and innovation supported by Horizon Europe has to be a big part of that. And thirdly, because the global challenges that we're facing can only be achieved, demand a global response, I hope that with Horizon Europe, and in particular the new possibilities that it opens for association with third countries, including, of course, the UK, but also other partners like Canada, Japan, and others, the United States, that we can really make a bigger difference in the necessary global collaboration around some of the challenges that we're facing.
And on that optimistic note, I'm very pleased to bring this session to a close. Thank you so much, Mona Nima, Patrick Child, Kimmo Koski, Jean Chambaz, for your contributions.